The night sky shimmered with hues of violet and gold, casting an otherworldly glow over the sprawling cityscape of Zalora, the capital of the Velith Empire. Towering spires made of translucent crystal pierced the heavens, their surfaces alive with pulsating light that mirrored the heartbeat of the planet itself. It was said that every structure in Zalora was infused with fragments of the Great Core, a colossal crystalline entity buried deep beneath the surface, the source of all life and power for the Velith people. But tonight, the beauty of the city was marred by chaos. Explosions echoed through the air, sending shockwaves rippling across the skyline. Fires raged unchecked, consuming centuries-old architecture in moments. The once proud banners of the royal family fluttered helplessly in the wind, reduced to tattered remnants. This was no ordinary battle. It was a coup, an act of betrayal so profound it threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the empire. At the center of the storm stood Princess Lyria, heir to the throne and bearer of the royal shard, a fragment of the great core embedded within her chest. Her silver hair flowed wildly around her as she stumbled through the wreckage of what had been her private chambers. Blood, her blood, flowed freely from a deep gash on her side, staining the pristine floor beneath her feet. Unlike human blood, hers shimmered faintly, like liquid starlight, a testament to the symbiotic bond between her kind and the crystals that sustained them. Lyria's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed one hand against her wound, trying desperately to stem the flow. Her glowing blue eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of escape. She had trusted these people, her advisors, her guards, even members of her own family. And now they had turned against her without warning. The realization burned more deeply than any physical injury ever could. "Princess," a voice called out sharply behind her. Lyria spun around just in time to see Commander Drevik step into view, his armor scorched but still gleaming menacingly under the flickering lights. He was flanked by two soldiers, their weapons trained directly on her. Once her most loyal protector, Drevik now wore the insignia of the rebellion stitched onto his uniform, a twisted mockery of everything he once stood for. "You betrayed me," Lyria whispered, her voice trembling with equal parts disbelief and fury. "Why?" Drevik's expression remained cold, unreadable. "Because you are weak, Your Highness. You cling to outdated ideals of unity and peace, while our enemies grow stronger every day. The Empire needs strength, not mercy. And you would only hold us back." Before she could respond, another explosion rocked the palace, causing the ceiling above them to crack ominously. Dust rained down, obscuring her vision momentarily. When it cleared, Lyria found herself surrounded. More soldiers poured into the chamber, sealing off her last chance at escape. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. If this was truly the end, she would face it with dignity. "Take her away," Drevik ordered, turning his back dismissively. "Leave her somewhere far from here. Let the wastelands finish what we started." "No," Lyria shouted, struggling futilely against the hands gripping her arms. "You can't do this. I am your princess." But her cries fell on deaf ears. As the soldiers dragged her toward the transport bay, she caught one final glimpse of the shattered palace, the place where she had grown up, dreamed of ruling wisely, and hoped to bring prosperity to her people. Now it lay in ruins, much like her future. Hours later, Lyria woke to the sound of howling winds. Her body ached all over, and the sharp sting of icy air bit at her exposed skin. Blinking groggily, she realized she was lying on a barren stretch of land, the ground beneath her cracked and lifeless. Above her loomed a blood-red sky, devoid of stars or warmth. She was alone. For a moment, despair threatened to consume her. How could this have happened? How could those she trusted abandon her so completely? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. No, she wouldn't give up. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in her lungs. Summoning every ounce of strength, Lyria pushed herself upright, clutching her injured side. The shard in her chest pulsed weakly, its glow dimmer than usual. Without proper care, it might fail entirely, leaving her vulnerable to the harsh environment. She knew she couldn't survive long out here, but surrender wasn't an option either. As she staggered forward, her thoughts drifted to legends she'd heard as a child. Tales of humans who lived on distant worlds beyond the reaches of Valith space. They were primitive compared to her people, lacking advanced technology or connection to the Great Core. Yet they possessed something the Valith often dismissed: resilience. Perhaps if fate allowed, she might encounter one of these humans someday. Maybe then, she could find a way to reclaim what had been stolen from her. For now, though, survival was her only goal. One step at a time, Lyria moved forward, determined to endure whatever challenges lay ahead. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, hope still lingered, and she intended to find it. The outpost on Delta 7 was as desolate as any place Corporal Elias Kane had ever seen. The barren moon stretched endlessly before him, its gray surface pockmarked with craters and jagged rocks. The only signs of life, or at least human presence, were the prefabricated structures that made up the small military base. It wasn't much to look at, but it served its purpose: a forward operating station for monitoring uncharted regions of space. Elias adjusted his rifle strap as he stepped out of the transport shuttle, squinting against the harsh glare of the distant sun. His commanding officer, Captain Marlowe, had briefed him earlier about unusual energy readings detected nearby. "Could be nothing," Marlowe had said gruffly. "But if it's something important, we need to know first." That was the way things worked out here, on the edge of known space, where danger lurked around every corner and every mission carried an air of uncertainty. "All right, team," Elias called out to the 3 other soldiers accompanying him. "Let's move quick. These readings are coming from less than 2 clicks east. Keep your eyes peeled." The group moved cautiously across the rocky terrain, their boots crunching softly against the dry soil. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crackle of static over their comms. As they approached the coordinates flagged by their scanners, strange objects began to appear, fragments of metallic debris scattered haphazardly across the ground. Some pieces glowed faintly, emitting a soft blue light that seemed almost alive. "What do you make of this?" Private Harris asked, crouching down to inspect one of the larger chunks. He ran his gloved fingers over its smooth surface, frowning. "It doesn't match anything in our database." Elias knelt beside him, studying the fragment closely. There was no mistaking it. The material wasn't of human origin. Whoever, or whatever, had created this technology was far more advanced than humanity. For a moment, he felt a flicker of unease. Out here, encountering alien artifacts usually meant trouble, but orders were orders, and curiosity got the better of him. "Spread out," Elias instructed. "Let's see if there's more." As the team fanned out, Elias wandered toward a cluster of boulders partially buried in the dirt. Something about the shadows caught his eye, a faint shimmer like sunlight reflecting off water. He hesitated, then stepped closer, peering into the darkness beneath the rocks. And that's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just another piece of wreckage, a twisted mass of metal half buried in the ground. But as he leaned in, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't metal at all. It was skin. Pale, luminous skin, streaked with what looked like crystalline blood. And beneath it, a face, delicate yet hauntingly beautiful, framed by strands of silvery hair matted with grime. She was alive. Elias dropped to his knees, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Over here," he shouted, waving frantically to the others. "We've got a survivor." The rest of the team rushed over, weapons drawn instinctively. They lowered them quickly upon seeing the figure lying motionless before them. She didn't look human, not entirely, but she clearly wasn't a machine either. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and embedded in the center of it was a pulsating shard of crystal, glowing faintly despite the dim light. "What is she?" Private Lewis muttered, his voice tinged with awe and apprehension. "I don't know," Elias replied, already shrugging off his pack. "But she's hurt bad. We can't leave her here." He carefully brushed away the debris covering her body, revealing more injuries, cuts and bruises that marred her otherwise flawless skin. Her clothes, tattered and singed, suggested she'd been through some kind of explosion or crash. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't been kind. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Harris asked nervously, glancing around at the eerie landscape. "This could be a trap." "I'm sure," Elias said firmly. "If we don't help her, she'll die. And I didn't sign up to let people die when I can stop it." With careful precision, Elias scooped the mysterious woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. Despite her fragile appearance, there was an undeniable strength radiating from her, a quiet resilience that intrigued him. He nodded to the others, signaling them to head back to the outpost. Back at the base, Elias laid the woman gently on a makeshift medical cot inside the infirmary tent. The shard in her chest continued to pulse rhythmically, casting a soft glow across the room. Using basic field medicine techniques, he cleaned her wounds as best he could, applying antiseptic gels and bandages scavenged from their limited supplies. None of it was designed for someone like her, but it was all he had. Hours passed, and the woman remained unconscious. Elias stayed by her side, unable to shake the feeling that she was somehow important. He studied her features intently, the sharp angles of her cheekbones, the faint luminescence of her skin, the intricate patterns etched into the crystal embedded in her chest. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did she seem so otherworldly? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her eyelids fluttered open. Elias froze, holding his breath as her gaze locked onto his. Her eyes were unlike anything he'd ever seen, deep pools of liquid blue that seemed to pierce straight through him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she raised a trembling hand, pointing at the shard in her chest and mouthing words he couldn't understand. "It's okay," Elias said softly, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "You're safe now." Her lips moved again, forming unfamiliar syllables. Frustration flickered across her face as she struggled to communicate. Realizing the language barrier, Elias grabbed a datapad and began sketching simple images: a star, a planet, a person. When he drew a crude representation of her lying under the rocks, her expression softened, and she nodded weakly. Encouraged, Elias kept drawing, trying to piece together her story. Bit by bit, she pointed to certain symbols and mimicked gestures, conveying fragments of information. He learned that her name was Lyria, though how exactly she conveyed that remained a mystery. She also indicated that she came from somewhere far away, a place marked by towering spires and glowing crystals. Most importantly, she communicated one thing very clearly: she was alone. As the hours turned into days, a tentative bond began to form between them. Though they couldn't fully understand each other, their shared determination to bridge the gap brought them closer. Elias taught her basic phrases in English, while she showed him how the shard in her chest responded to her emotions, glowing brighter when she was happy or agitated. Despite the progress, Elias couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were running out of time. Sooner or later, whoever, or whatever, had left Lyria for dead would come looking for her. And when they did, Elias knew he wouldn't be able to protect her alone. Days turned into weeks, and the small outpost on Delta 7 became an unlikely haven for Lyria. Though her injuries were healing, her presence remained a mystery to everyone except Corporal Elias Kane. The soldiers stationed at the base exchanged wary glances whenever they saw her, unsure of what to make of the alien woman with glowing blue eyes and crystalline blood. Some whispered about her being dangerous, while others marveled at her ethereal beauty. But Elias paid little attention to their murmurs. To him, she was simply Lyria, a survivor who deserved compassion. Their bond deepened with each passing day. Communication between them was still limited, but they had developed a unique way of understanding one another. Elias used drawings, gestures, and simple phrases to teach Lyria basic English, while she demonstrated snippets of her own language through melodic tones and flowing hand movements. They laughed often during these lessons, finding joy in the smallest victories, like when Lyria finally managed to say thank you, or when Elias correctly mimicked the pronunciation of her name. But beyond the laughter and shared smiles lay a growing curiosity. Elias couldn't help but wonder about the world Lyria came from. The towering spires she described, the shimmering crystals that seemed to pulse with life, and the betrayal that had left her stranded. In return, Lyria listened intently as Elias spoke about Earth, painting vivid pictures of sprawling cities, vast oceans, and humanity's relentless drive to explore the stars despite its limitations. One evening, as the twin moons of Delta 7 cast silvery light over the barren landscape, Elias sat beside Lyria outside the infirmary tent. The air was cool, and the silence between them was comfortable. He pulled up a datapad, scrolling through images he downloaded from the outpost's archives, photos of Earth's landscapes, its people, and its achievements. "This is my home," Elias said, pointing to a picture of a bustling city skyline. "It's not perfect, but it's where I belong." Lyria tilted her head, studying the image closely. Her fingers traced the screen gently, as if trying to feel the texture of the buildings. Then, without warning, she placed her hand over her chest, right above the pulsating shard embedded there. She looked at Elias, her expression serious. "You miss it," she said slowly, stumbling over the words but managing to convey their meaning. Elias nodded, surprised by how well she understood him. "Yeah, sometimes. But I'm here now. And so are you." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though sadness lingered in her eyes. It was clear she missed her own world too, a place she might never see again. For the first time, Elias felt a pang of guilt for asking questions about her past. He realized that while his stories brought her comfort, they also reminded her of everything she had lost. As their connection grew stronger, so did Lyria's confidence in using her abilities. The shard in her chest wasn't just a source of power. It was a part of her, intricately linked to her emotions and will. One afternoon, while exploring the outpost's perimeter, Elias watched in awe as Lyria extended her hand toward a malfunctioning energy generator. The device sputtered weakly, its lights flickering erratically. With a focused expression, Lyria closed her eyes, and the shard began to glow brighter. A surge of energy coursed through the air, and suddenly, the generator roared back to life, humming steadily. "How did you do that?" Elias asked, his voice filled with wonder. Lyria shrugged, smiling shyly. "Crystal helps me." She tapped her chest lightly. "It listens." Elias stared at her, realizing how much he still didn't know about her kind. The Vailith Empire, if that was indeed where she came from, was far more advanced than humanity could have imagined. Yet despite her incredible abilities, Lyria carried herself with humility. She didn't boast about her powers or use them recklessly. Instead, she treated them as tools meant to help others, even in small ways like fixing broken equipment. Their peaceful routine, however, was shattered one fateful morning. As Elias prepared for a routine patrol, alarms blared throughout the outpost. Red warning lights flashed overhead, casting an ominous glow across the camp. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, weapons drawn and ready. "What's going on?" Elias demanded, rushing to the command center. Captain Marlowe stood at the console, his face pale with concern. "Unidentified vessel approaching fast. Doesn't match any known signatures." Elias's heart sank. Could this be who, or what, had abandoned Lyria? If her enemies had found her, none of them would be safe. "Lyria!" Elias shouted, sprinting toward the infirmary. When he burst inside, he found her already standing, her posture tense and alert. The shard in her chest pulsed rapidly, reacting to the sudden tension in the air. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've come for me." Before Elias could respond, the ground shook violently as something massive descended from the sky. Through the window, He caught sight of a sleek, black ship hovering above the outpost, its surface adorned with jagged markings that seemed to writhe like living shadows. The vessel exuded menace, and Elias instinctively reached for his rifle. "We need to get you out of here," he said urgently, grabbing Lyria's arm. She hesitated, shaking her head. "No, you must leave. They will hurt you if they find us together." "I'm not leaving you," Elias replied firmly. "Not again." His words struck a chord within her, and for a moment, tears welled up in her eyes. She nodded, trusting him completely despite the danger ahead. Together, they slipped out of the infirmary and into the chaos unfolding outside. Soldiers fired futile shots at the intruders, who emerged from the ship clad in menacing armor. At the forefront was a tall figure with piercing yellow eyes and a cruel smirk etched onto his face. This was Cal Voreth, the bounty hunter sent to eliminate Lyria. "Princess," Cal sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You shouldn't have made this difficult." Lyria stepped forward, shielding Elias behind her. Her shard flared brilliantly, bathing the area in radiant light. "You will not take me," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. Cale chuckled darkly. Brave words for someone so alone. But Lyria wasn't alone anymore. Elias raised his weapon, aiming directly at Cale. "She's not alone," he growled. "And neither am I." The standoff marked the beginning of a battle that would test both their courage and their bond. As the fight erupted around them, Elias and Lyria fought side by side, determined to protect each other no matter the cost. For the first time since her fall from grace, Lyria felt a spark of hope, not because of her powers, but because of the human who refused to let her go. The battle erupted with a deafening roar, shattering the fragile calm of the outpost. Cal Voreth's mercenaries moved with precision, their weapons firing bursts of energy that tore through the air like lightning. The soldiers stationed at the outpost fought back valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Sparks flew as blasts struck metal walls, sending chunks of debris raining down on everyone below. Amidst the chaos, Elias and Lyria stood shoulder to shoulder, their determination unyielding despite the overwhelming odds. Elias fired his rifle in short, controlled bursts, aiming for the nearest mercenaries. His training kicked in, keeping him focused even as fear clawed at the edges of his mind. Beside him, Lyria wielded her shard's power with growing confidence. With a flick of her wrist, she sent arcs of radiant energy surging toward the attackers, disabling several weapons and forcing their enemies to retreat momentarily. The glow from her crystal pulsed brighter with every movement, illuminating the battlefield like a beacon of defiance. "Stay close," Elias shouted over the din, grabbing Lyria's arm to pull her behind cover as another volley of shots whizzed past them. She nodded, her expression tense but resolute. Despite the danger, there was no trace of hesitation in her eyes, only resolve. Cale watched the scene unfold from a distance, his lips curling into a cruel smile. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't anticipated this level of coordination between the human soldier and the alien princess. It intrigued him, though not enough to spare either of them. Raising his hand, he signaled for his team to intensify their assault, ensuring that Elias and Lyria would have no time to regroup. As the fight dragged on, the outpost began to crumble under the relentless barrage. Fires spread rapidly, consuming supplies and equipment. Smoke choked the air, making it hard to breathe. Soldiers scrambled to evacuate the wounded, their faces streaked with soot and desperation. Elias knew they couldn't hold out much longer, not against an enemy as ruthless as Cal's forces. "We need to get out of here," Elias said, ducking behind a crumbling wall as another explosion rocked the ground beneath them. "If we stay, we're dead." Lyria shook her head firmly. "No, they will follow us. We must finish this now." Her words caught Elias off guard. Finish it. How could they possibly stand a chance against such overwhelming numbers? But before he could argue, Lyria stepped forward, her shard glowing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. She raised both hands, channeling her energy into a single concentrated blast that surged outward in a brilliant wave of light. The force knocked several mercenaries off their feet, leaving them stunned and disoriented. Elias stared at her in awe. "You can do that." "I didn't know until now," Lyria admitted, panting heavily. Her strength was waning, the strain of using her powers evident in the way her body trembled. "But I won't let them win." Inspired by her bravery, Elias tightened his grip on his rifle and charged forward, taking advantage of the temporary lull in the fighting. Together, they pushed deeper into the heart of the outpost, determined to turn the tide of the battle, or at least buy themselves enough time to escape. Kale, however, was not one to underestimate his opponents. Watching from the shadows, he analyzed their movements, noting how Elias shielded Lyria whenever possible and how she used her abilities to protect him in return. Their bond infuriated him. It was clear that Lyria drew strength not just from her shard, but from the human who refused to abandon her. Such weakness disgusted him. The bolt of energy streaked through the air, its trajectory unerring as it hurtled toward Elias. Time seemed to stretch, every second elongating into an eternity. Lyria's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was about to happen. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, throwing herself between Elias and the deadly blast. The impact sent her sprawling to the ground, the shard in her chest flaring violently as it absorbed some of the energy. A sharp cry escaped her lips, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to succumb to the pain. Elias dropped to his knees beside her, panic gripping his heart as he saw the fresh wound on her shoulder, glowing faintly with residual energy. "Lyria," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Are you okay?" She nodded weakly, though her breathing was labored. "I'm fine," she managed to say, seeing a small smile despite the agony coursing through her body. "But we can't stay here." Elias clenched his fists, anger boiling within him. He turned his gaze toward Kull, who stood smugly at the edge of the battlefield, his weapon still trained on them. The bounty hunter's smirk only fueled Elias's rage. For a moment, he considered charging at Cal head-on. Consequences be damned. But then he felt Lyria's hand on his arm, pulling him back to reality. "We need to go," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling but firm. "Now." Reluctantly, Elias helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they retreated deeper into the outpost. Behind them, Kale barked orders to his mercenaries, sending them in pursuit. The chase was relentless, forcing Elias and Lyria to navigate narrow corridors and crumbling structures while dodging bursts of enemy fire. Each step was a gamble, each breath a risk. Their flight led them to an ancient ruin hidden beneath the outpost, a forgotten relic buried by time and neglect. The entrance was partially concealed by fallen debris, but Elias spotted it just in time, ushering Lyria inside before sealing the passage behind them. The interior was dimly lit by bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls, casting eerie shadows that danced across the stone surfaces. Strange symbols were carved into the rock, their intricate designs hinting at a civilization long gone. "This place," Lyria murmured, her eyes scanning the inscriptions. Her fingers traced one of them. Elias rushed to her side, cradling her gently. "Lyria, no. Please, stay with me." She smiled weakly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm still here," she whispered, "for now." Though weakened, Lyria's display of power had bought them precious time. As Kale and his remaining forces retreated, Elias carried Lyria out of the ruins and into the safety of the wilderness beyond. They found temporary refuge in a secluded cave, where Elias tended to her wounds once again, his hands trembling with fear and frustration. "We can't keep running," he said quietly, his voice heavy with determination. "If we're going to survive, we need a plan." Lyria nodded, her resolve hardening despite her frail condition. "Then let's make one. Together." The cave was quiet, save for the soft crackling of a small fire Elias had built to keep them warm. Lyria lay on a makeshift bed of blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. The shard in her chest glowed faintly, its light dimmer than ever before, a stark reminder of the toll her last stand had taken on her body and spirit. Despite her frail appearance, there was an unyielding determination in her eyes as she gazed up at the jagged ceiling of the cave. Elias sat beside her, his rifle resting across his lap. He hadn't slept since their escape from the ruins, too consumed by guilt and worry to rest. Every time he looked at Lyria, he replayed the moment she had shielded him from Cal's attack, the way she had thrown herself into harm's way without hesitation. Her selflessness both awed and terrified him. If anything happened to her because of him, "We need to talk about what comes next," Elias said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made Lyria turn her head toward him. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone soft yet curious. "I mean," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "you can't keep pushing yourself like this. Using your powers like you did, it nearly killed you. We're not ready to face Kale or anyone else who's after you if we don't have a real plan." Lyria sighed, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I know I'm running out of time, Elias. The shard, it's fading. Without it, I won't survive long. But I also know I can't let fear stop me from doing what needs to be done." Elias clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "That's exactly my point. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Let me help you, not just fight alongside you, but figure out how to protect you. There has to be another way." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire popped softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls of the cave. Then, slowly, Lyria reached out and placed her hand over Elias's. Her touch was cool but comforting, grounding him in a way nothing else could. "You've already helped more than you realize," she said quietly. "But you're right. We need a plan. Not just to survive, but to win." The next morning, they set out under the cover of dawn, heading deeper into the wilderness. Their goal was clear: find allies who could aid them in their fight against Kale and the forces threatening Lyria's life. Though the idea seemed far-fetched, Elias clung to the hope that somewhere out there, someone, or something, might share their cause. Their journey took them through treacherous terrain, dense forests where bioluminescent plants cast eerie green lights, barren plateaus battered by relentless winds, and shadowy valleys teeming with strange creatures that watched them silently from the darkness. Each step tested their endurance, both physically and emotionally. Yet, despite the hardships, their bond only grew stronger. They relied on each other completely, trusting implicitly in their shared mission. One evening, as they camped near a crystal-clear stream, Lyria knelt by the water, cupping some in her hands to drink. As she did, her reflection shimmered oddly, distorted by ripples that shouldn't have existed. Frowning, she leaned closer, her fingers brushing the surface. Suddenly, the water began to glow, pulsating in sync with the shard in her chest. "What's happening?" Elias asked, stepping forward cautiously. "I think," Lyria murmured, her voice tinged with awe, "this place is connected to the Great Core." Before Elias could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A massive structure rose from the earth, its crystalline spires gleaming in the moonlight. It was ancient, far older than the ruins they had discovered earlier, and radiated a sense of power so immense it made Elias's skin prickle. Inside the structure, they found a chamber unlike anything they'd seen before. At its center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a fragment of crystal identical to the one embedded in Lyria's chest. The shard pulsed rhythmically, as if beckoning her closer. "This is it," Lyria whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "A piece of the original core." She approached the pedestal hesitantly, reaching out to touch the crystal. As her fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, revitalizing the shard within her chest. Its glow intensified, filling the chamber with blinding light. Visions flooded her mind, Images of her ancestors, memories of a time when the core was whole, and glimpses of a future where it could be restored. When the light faded, Lyria staggered back, clutching her chest. She turned to Elias, her expression a mix of wonder and determination. If I can gather enough fragments like this, I might be able to heal the core, and myself. Elias nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was saying. Then we'll find them. All of them. Their newfound purpose reignited their drive, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Kale, furious over his failure at the ruins, redoubled his efforts to track them down. His ship scoured the skies, deploying drones and scouts to hunt for any sign of Lyria. One night, as Elias and Lyria rested in a hidden grove, they were ambushed by a group of mercenaries. Caught off guard, Elias fired blindly into the darkness, trying to hold them off while Lyria gathered her strength. But the attackers were relentless, closing in from all sides. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, Lyria unleashed a burst of energy that sent shockwaves rippling through the area. Trees splintered, rocks shattered, and the mercenaries were thrown back like leaves in a storm. But the effort left her drained, collapsing to her knees as the shard in her chest flickered dangerously. Elias rushed to her side, shielding her with his body as the remaining mercenaries regrouped. Enough. Kel's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. He stepped forward, his weapon aimed directly at Elias. Surrender, princess, or watch your human die. Lyria's heart sank. She couldn't let Elias pay the price for her defiance. Summoning every ounce of strength, she rose to her feet, her shard glowing fiercely once more. "Leave him alone," she commanded, her voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to consume her. "Your fight is with me." Kale smirked, lowering his weapon slightly. "Very well. Face me, then." With no other choice, Lyria stepped forward, facing Kale in a battle that would determine not only her fate but the fate of her people. The air crackled with energy as their powers clashed, lighting up the night sky like a supernova. Elias watched helplessly, praying that Lyria's newfound strength would be enough to see her through. In the end, it wasn't brute force that won the day, it was sacrifice. Exhausted and battered, Lyria channeled the last reserves of her power into a final desperate strike, disabling Kel's weapon and leaving him vulnerable. With a roar of frustration, he retreated, vowing revenge. The journey back to Zaelora was fraught with peril, but it was also a testament to Lyria and Elias's unwavering determination. With each step closer to her homeworld, Lyria felt a mixture of dread and hope bubbling within her. She had spent weeks gathering fragments of the Great Core, revitalizing the shard in her chest and strengthening her connection to its ancient power. Yet, every pulse of energy reminded her of what she stood to lose, not just her life, but the lives of countless others if she failed. Elias, too, carried a heavy burden. Though he had promised to stand by her side, the thought of entering the heart of an alien empire filled him with unease. He knew little about the Vailith people beyond the legends Lyria had shared, and even less about their politics. But one thing was certain. They were walking into a lion's den, and failure meant death for both of them. Their infiltration began under the cover of darkness. The towering spires of Zaelora loomed ahead, their crystalline surfaces shimmering like stars against the night sky. It was a breathtaking sight, but there was no time for admiration. Lyria led the way, her movements deliberate and silent as she navigated the labyrinthine streets of the capital city. She knew these alliances well, hidden passages, abandoned tunnels, and forgotten courtyards that few others remembered. Her knowledge gave them a slim advantage, though it wasn't enough to make them invincible. "This is insane," Elias muttered as they crouched behind a stack of crates in a shadowy alleyway. "How are we supposed to take down an entire empire?" "We're not taking it down," Lyria replied, her voice low but firm. "We're exposing the truth. My family betrayed me because they feared losing control over the core. If I can prove that restoring it will bring balance, not destruction, they won't dare oppose me. And if they do? Elias asked pointedly. Lyria hesitated, then placed a hand over his. Then we'll fight. Together. Her words reassured him, though only slightly. As they continued their approach toward the Imperial Palace, they encountered pockets of resistance, patrols of soldiers, surveillance drones, and automated defense systems designed to detect intruders. Each obstacle tested their resolve, forcing them to rely on quick thinking and sheer luck to evade capture. At one point, they narrowly escaped detection when a drone hovered inches above their hiding spot beneath a pile of rubble. Elias held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it would give them away. Beside him, Lyria remained perfectly still, her shard dimmed to avoid drawing attention. When the drone finally moved on, Elias exhaled shakily, meeting Lyria's gaze with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You've got nerves of steel," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "So do you." Finally, after days of careful maneuvering, they reached the heart of the palace, the throne room. It was a cavernous chamber bathed in golden light, its walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the history of the Vailith Empire. At the center stood the royal shard altar, a pedestal upon which fragments of the great core were traditionally displayed as symbols of unity and prosperity. Now, however, the altar was empty, a grim reflection of the corruption that had consumed the empire. Lyria stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her tattered appearance. Behind her, Elias kept watch, his rifle ready for any sign of trouble. But for now, the room was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation. "Show yourself," Lyria called out, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I know you're here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, figures emerged from the shadows. Her uncle, Lord Soren, flanked by members of the Royal Council. Their expressions ranged from shock to disdain, but none of them dared approach her directly. "Lyria," Soren said finally, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "You're alive." "How?" "Unexpected." "Save your lies," Lyria shot back, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I know what you did. You abandoned me, left me to die, all because you feared losing control over the core. But look where your greed has brought us. The empire is fractured, our people suffering, and the core itself on the verge of collapse." Soren sneered, stepping closer. "And what do you propose, Princess? That we bow to your whims, restore the core, and risk unleashing chaos? No, we've worked too hard to secure our power." "That's where you're wrong," Lyria countered, raising her voice so it carried across the room. "The core isn't a weapon, it's a gift, a source of life and strength meant to unite us, not divide us. If you refuse to see that, then you don't deserve to rule." Her words resonated deeply, stirring something in those who listened. Several members of the council exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering. Even Soren seemed momentarily shaken, though he quickly masked it with anger. "Enough," he barked, signaling for the guards to seize her. "Take her away." But before anyone could move, Lyria raised her hands, channeling the full force of the core fragments she had gathered. The shard in her chest erupted with radiant energy, flooding the room with blinding light. When the glow subsided, the air crackled with power, and the once empty altar now pulsed with renewed vitality. "This is the future," Lyria declared, her voice ringing with authority. "A future where the core heals, rather than destroys. Choose wisely, or be left behind." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. One by one, members of the council knelt in reverence, pledging their loyalty to her vision. Only Soren remained standing, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat, turning to flee. But Elias was ready. Stepping forward, he aimed his rifle squarely at Soren's retreating figure. "Not today," he said coldly. With Soren neutralized and the council united under her leadership, Lyria took her rightful place as ruler of the Vailith Empire. Under her guidance, reconstruction efforts began immediately, focusing on healing both the planet and its people. The great core became a symbol of renewal, its restored essence bringing prosperity to all corners of the empire. As peace settled over Zaelora, Elias found himself facing a difficult decision. His mission had been completed, but his heart belonged to two worlds now, one human, one alien. Standing beside Lyria on a balcony overlooking the city, he voiced his thoughts aloud. "I should go back," he said softly. "Earth needs me." Lyria nodded, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "I understand. You have a duty to your people, just as I have mine." They shared a long, silent moment, their bond transcending words. Finally, Lyria reached into her pocket and retrieved a small fragment of the core, placing it in Elias's hand. "Take this," she said, "a reminder of what we fought for and what we've shared." Elias closed his fingers around the shard, feeling